Welcome to Basta Stories, where real-life horror and true ghost stories come to life, from haunted forests to chilling encounters with the darkest parts of human nature. Each episode dives into the terrifying and unexplained. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and ask yourself, are you really alone?
It started with a pizza order. But I swear to you now, if I had ignored it, if I had just said no, none of this would have happened. The scent of something rotten has followed me ever since. Not on my clothes, not on my skin, but somewhere deeper, somewhere that soap and silence can't reach. I was 17 the summer it found me, and no matter how far I've run from that night, I never outran the stench of it. My name is Chris, and what I'm about to tell you is something I'd forgotten for years. Not because it was insignificant, but because my mind decided it was better buried. It wasn't until a few weeks ago, when a friend from high school casually asked me if I ever thought about that weird delivery run, that the memories started trickling back. And once they did, I couldn't stop the flood. That summer, I was working nights at a hole-in-the-wall pizza joint on the edge of town. Not out of ambition or passion for the culinary arts. Hell no. It was survival. My parents made it crystal clear that if I wasn't working, I wasn't eating. And since the town was too small and too broke to offer much else, I ended up at Santino's Pizza and Subs. An ironic name, considering we neither had anyone named Santino nor served decent subs. If I had to describe that place in one word, it'd be sticky. Sticky counters, sticky floors, sticky aprons. Like the building itself had been sweating for years and never once dried off. The kind of place where the soda machine always leaked and the ceiling fan spun just slow enough to be completely useless. It was so grimy you could taste it. The food? Awful. And I'm not being dramatic. The sauce was bitter. The cheese tasted like plastic. And the crust always felt like it had been baked 3 days before. I remember wondering why anyone in their right mind would ever order from us. But for some reason, they did. Maybe it was because we were the only place open past midnight in that part of town. Maybe it was because no one cared enough to complain. I usually worked the closing shift, which meant long stretches of doing nothing, interrupted occasionally by a single lonely order or two. The best part? We were so far from downtown, so out of the way, that most nights were dead quiet. I didn't mind. The fewer orders we got, the more time I could waste restocking the fridge and scrolling my phone behind the counter. One night, hot, damp, the kind of summer night that makes your skin feel like a damp paper towel, I was restocking the drink fridge when the tablet buzzed. An online order. I didn't even look at it at first. Probably another cheese pizza. or wings combo. I thought, but something about this one gave me pause the moment I glanced at the ticket. It was a large sausage and olive pizza. That alone stood out, because we rarely, like almost never, had people order olives. Most of the time, the container in the prep fridge just sat there, collecting condensation. I actually remember squinting at the screen and muttering, "Really? Olives?" But it wasn't the toppings that got me. It was the address. It was out past the edge of our delivery zone. Not just barely over, miles past it. An unlit stretch of road I vaguely recognized from driving my cousin to a party out in the sticks the year before. Not the kind of place we normally serviced. I hovered my finger over the reject button, ready to cancel the order, when I heard the scrape of a chair from the back office. My manager, Russell, poked his head out. Early 30s, permanently tired eyes, a half-finished Reddit thread open on his phone 24/7. "Take it," he said flatly. "We haven't had a single run in over an hour." I mean, it's way out of range. You want to keep folding boxes for another 2 hours? Or you want to kill time driving in air conditioning? That was all it took. I was 17. The idea of doing something slightly rebellious, like driving past the boundaries of our delivery zone, somehow made me feel cooler than I actually was. So I nodded, printed the ticket, and grabbed the pizza. As I tucked the box into the red insulated bag, I noticed Russell stapled a set of delivery instructions to the outside. At first, I didn't pay attention. They were usually useless, stuff like ring doorbell twice, or don't forget napkins. But something told me to read this one. I'm glad I did, because what it said has lived in my memory like a scar I keep scratching open. The note read, "Park on the street behind the house. Walk through the backyard. Knock on the back door only." No explanation. No context. No name. For a second, I just stared at it. The wording was so specific, so practiced. It didn't read like a request. It read like an instruction, a rule, something you either followed completely or didn't follow at all. My teenage brain, of course, tried to rationalize it. Maybe the front steps were broken. Maybe there was a sleeping baby in the front room. Maybe someone didn't want their partner to know they were ordering pizza. I shrugged. Whatever. It's not like I had anything better to do. I loaded the address into my phone, cranked up the AC, and pulled out of the parking lot. The road bled into nothing the farther I drove. Street lamps grew fewer, the houses more spread out, until they just stopped. All I had left was the dim wash of my headlights, the quiet hum of the AC, and the staleness creeping through the vents, no matter how high I blasted them. It was the kind of night that felt like it had no sky, just thick, wet air pressing down on the car, the kind that made your shirt cling to you before you even stepped outside. The windows had fogged around the edges, like the car didn't want to see where we were going. Even my GPS hesitated. The blue route line jittered, rerouted, then reappeared with one final direction. Turn left into a narrow, unmarked road that looked more like a dirt trail than anything meant for wheels. I hesitated, but followed the path. I remember how tight that road was, shoulderless, hemmed in by trees on one side and leaning chain-link fences on the other. My tires crunched over gravel as I coasted, trying not to spook myself. But the truth is, I was already spooked. That smell, the one I mentioned before, started clawing its way into the car again. A thick, sour funk like sun-baked garbage and rubber tires left out in the rain. I could taste it on the back of my tongue. It made me swallow every few seconds just to chase the bitterness away. I rolled up the last cracked window, sealed myself in, and kept driving. Eventually, the GPS pinged and blinked. You've arrived. Except there was no house in sight. Not the way you'd expect. Ahead of me was a sagging wooden fence leaning sideways in surrender. Wild grass strangling it from the base. A mailbox with half its numbers scratched off sat beside a gravel pull-off. Through the fence slats, I could just barely make out the rear end of a house, low-roofed, pitch dark, like it had been left behind by time itself. I parked. There were no lights, no porch lamps, no glow in the windows, no car in the driveway, nothing that said, "Someone lives here." Just that handwritten instruction stapled to the box in the seat next to me. Park behind the house, walk through the backyard, knock on the back door only. Why only the back door? That thought buzzed around in my head like a fly I couldn't swat. Still, I got out. My sneakers crunched into gravel as I stepped into the heavy air. It felt like I'd walked into a sealed room, hot, unmoving, like the wind itself had died hours ago. The sky above wasn't cloudy, but it wasn't starry either. It just hung there, like an unfinished painting. I grabbed the pizza bag and clicked on my flashlight, tilting the beam downward to watch my footing. The grass was ankle-high and sharp, itching at my legs as I moved uphill toward the house. Each step forward felt like trespassing. When I reached the top of the small incline, I saw the door, just as described. A white wooden frame, paint peeling, with a tiny rectangular window at the top. That window had a thin curtain pulled across it, the kind you'd find at a dollar store, limp and yellowed with age. There was a single, rusty doormat that read, "Welcome," in faded red letters. I stood in front of the door and waited. Then I knocked. Once? Twice? No answer. I knocked again, this time firmer, my fist hitting the wood with a dull thud. Still nothing. I knew Russell would flip if I came back empty-handed. But more than that, I felt something wrong about leaving, like I'd interrupted something I didn't fully understand. And walking away now would somehow make it worse. So I stood there, still, quiet, listening. Then I saw it. The curtain moved. Just the smallest twitch, like someone's finger had brushed the fabric from behind. It wasn't a breeze. There was no breeze. It was deliberate, controlled, intentional, and it was enough to spike my heart into my throat. I didn't say anything. I didn't breathe. I just stared at that window, waiting for a face, for a hand, for the sound of a lock turning, or a voice saying, "Sorry, I was in the back." But no one came to the door. The curtain didn't move again. And yet, I knew someone was there. That singular twitch of fabric told me everything I needed to know. I was not alone. I looked down at the pizza box in my hand, the grease beginning to seep into the corners of the paper bag. My fingers felt clammy against the cardboard, and for a moment, I genuinely debated leaving it on the doormat and bolting back to the car. But I didn't, because I was sane, and 17-year-olds think they're invincible. I lifted my hand to knock one more time. Then, headlights from behind. They stretched across the gravel like ghosts and swallowed my shadow whole. They didn't pull in fast. No screeching tires, no blinding sirens, just quiet, calculated. 2 sets of headlights crawling toward me, like the eyes of something that had been waiting in the dark, watching me knock. I stood frozen at the back door, hand still halfway raised. My knuckles hovered inches from the cracked white paint. The pizza bag tucked beneath my other arm, like a forgotten burden. That twitch of the curtain had held my attention until now, but something new was demanding it. The light from the first unmarked car swept over the overgrown backyard and lit my figure like a spotlight on stage. I instinctively turned toward it, shielding my eyes. Another car idled behind it. No logos, no roof lights, just a dull hum and a pair of grills like teeth. One of the car doors opened. A man stepped out. No uniform, no visible gun, but the way he moved, calm, deliberate, not even looking around, told me he wasn't just passing by. He raised one hand, palm up, and motioned for me to come to him. My first thought was that maybe he lived here. Maybe he was just pulling in and saw me standing there with the pizza. Or maybe he was the one who placed the order and got home just in time. That kind of thing happens sometimes, right? I took a few cautious steps down the slope toward the car. Pizza box pressed tighter to my chest than I realized. As I got closer, I saw it. A badge. Not a shiny, ceremonial kind. Not the kind they wear on belts or pin to buttoned shirts. This one was plain. Government issue, pulled from the inside of his jacket, held low, like it wasn't meant for show, only for confirmation. He didn't smile, didn't speak like a neighbor. His voice was low and to the point. Go back to your car. Wait there. That was it. No explanation. No, you're not in trouble. No, thanks. We've got it from here. Just an order. Quiet, but firm. I nodded, though I didn't even remember deciding to. My body moved before my brain caught up. I turned and walked slowly back to the delivery car. My shoes scraped across the gravel. My chest felt heavy, like the air had thickened somehow. The pizza, suddenly unimportant, weighed more than it should have. I got in, shut the door, and locked it without thinking. That's when I noticed them. It wasn't just the man who flashed the badge. There were others, more than I could count at first, stepping out from the second car, from the shadows behind the trees, even appearing from somewhere further up the street. 5, maybe 6. No uniforms, no shouting. But they were coordinated. All of them carried flashlights, angled down low. Not the kind you wave around. These moved like scalpels, cutting through the dark with precision. Deliberate and silent, they split off like water flowing around a rock, circling the house from different angles. It was like watching a hunt. None of them knocked on the front door. None of them announced their presence. No police or "Is anyone home?" Just complete silence, broken only by the shuffling of grass under their shoes. One of them reached the back door, the same door I had just stood in front of, the same door I had nearly knocked on a third time before the headlights interrupted me. He tested the handle, gently, cautiously, like a surgeon feeling for a pulse. Locked. The man turned his head slightly and nodded toward another officer in the shadows. A signal. A cue I didn't understand. Then he stepped back. That was it. They didn't force entry. Didn't try again. They waited. Something about that scared me more than anything else. Because this wasn't a raid. It was a stakeout. A trap. Maybe. And I had just walked right into the middle of it. Inside my car, I sat still as stone. My fingers gripped the steering wheel like it might keep me anchored to reality. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale, hollow even. I felt like a spectator in my own life, like I was watching a scene from a movie I didn't remember auditioning for. And I kept thinking, what if I had gotten here 10 minutes earlier? What if they hadn't pulled in when they did? What if the door had opened? I looked back toward the house. The curtain didn't move again. No lights flickered on. No one stepped out. The silence was absolute. A kind of silence that felt loaded, like a breath being held. Like the night itself was waiting for something to go wrong. He crouched beside my window, like he had something delicate to say. Not urgent, not loud, but something you weren't supposed to hear from anyone else. The way a priest leans in before confession. The way a doctor exhales before using the word malignant. I saw his shadow first, long and stretched, bending as he crouched. The officer from before reappeared beside my window, like he'd been waiting for the moment to speak. I rolled the glass down, my hand trembling so slightly I hoped he wouldn't notice. His eyes flicked toward the pizza box still sitting on my passenger seat. I hadn't touched it. Neither had he. It was like a body between us, something dead we were pretending hadn't died. He let out a quiet breath, not annoyed, not relieved, just resigned. "This shouldn't have happened," he said. "We should have gotten to you sooner." The words hit harder than I expected. He didn't look like he was hiding anything, but he also didn't look like he could tell me much. The kind of look that says, "If you knew what I knew, you wouldn't be able to sleep either." I asked the only thing I could think to say. "What is this place?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he straightened up a little, scanned the area behind us, and then dropped his voice again. "There's an ongoing situation. We've been watching this property for a while. There's someone inside. Or there was. We don't know for sure." I blinked. "You mean like a suspect? Something like that?" That was all he gave me. The worst part? He looked genuinely sorry. Not pitying, just exhausted. Like a man who had spent too long chasing something that stayed just out of reach. "We were repositioning our cars," he continued. "Bad timing. You pulled in at the exact moment we'd stepped away from the house. The window curtain moved because you startled someone. That was close. Too close." That word, close, hung in the air like a question. Close to what? Close to danger? Close to something irreversible? I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Instead, I did what any good employee would do. I mentioned the app. "You want to see the order?" He nodded once. I pulled out my phone, hands still damp, navigated to the delivery interface, and flipped the screen toward him. It was all there. The address, timestamp, and most importantly, the name. First name only. Jerry. No last name. No apartment number. Just Jerry. The officer leaned in. He squinted at the screen, like he was expecting something different, maybe even hoping for it. Then he pulled out a pen from his coat and jotted the phone number onto a pad. He didn't ask to copy the rest. He didn't even take a picture. "Do you know this person?" I asked. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no either. He simply pocketed the notepad and stepped back from my car door. "You need to leave," he said. "But you need to leave now." I froze, still holding the phone. "My manager's gonna lose it," I muttered. A weak protest from a kid trying to make rent. I can't just show up with a full box. He just stared at me. Not cruel, not angry, just blank. Then, like a ghost in a suit, he turned and walked away without another word. I didn't start the car right away. I sat there in the dark, staring at the name on my screen. Jerry. It looked so normal, so mundane, and that terrified me more than anything. Because if evil wears a name like Jerry, it means anyone can be hiding something. It means monsters don't have fangs or claws or red eyes. Sometimes they just put olives on pizza. I imagined what might have happened if I'd arrived 5 minutes earlier. If that curtain had moved just a little more, if the door had opened, what would have happened to me? The cops weren't here to arrest someone. That much was obvious. They were here to see what the person inside would do. And I had become part of the experiment. There's a kind of fear that only hits once you're safe. A delayed shock, like your body waited until you had a door between you and the threat before it allowed your mind to panic. That's what happened to me. I didn't feel it at the house. I didn't even feel it during the drive. It hit the second I turned the key and stepped back into the real world. I drove off like I was being chased, even though nothing followed me. The headlights cut through the gravel road in front of me, and the trees seemed to lean inward as I passed, as if they'd been listening in on everything. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror for the first 10 minutes. I didn't want to see anything. A face in the back seat, someone stepping out of the woods, the curtain moving again. My hands gripped the wheel harder than they should have. My fingers ached by the time I hit the first real stretch of paved road. That entire ride back, my brain refused to settle. It kept looping through everything that had just happened, like a tape rewinding itself over and over again. What had that officer meant by "we were repositioning our cars"? Why hadn't they intervened sooner? Why had they let me get that close? The more I replayed the scene, the worse it got. That curtain, it didn't move randomly. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a cat. Someone had been standing behind that door, watching me, deciding what to do, debating whether or not to open it. And if the police hadn't pulled in at that exact moment, what would they have chosen? I started to sweat, even though the AC was still on full blast. The pizza bag was still on the passenger seat, the name Jerry printed neatly on the receipt, as if this was all just business as usual. But it wasn't. Nothing about this was normal. When I finally pulled into the pizza shop's back lot, the building looked different, smaller, colder, like it had shrunk while I was gone. I stepped out of the car and stood there for a few seconds, just breathing. The world around me hadn't changed. The lights were still flickering. The back door was still propped open with a brick. I could even hear Russell inside, laughing at something on his phone. But I had changed. I didn't feel 17 anymore. I felt watched, like I'd stumbled into a part of life I wasn't meant to see, like I'd been used. That thought hit me hard. I was the bait, the delivery instructions. Back door only. Who the hell writes that? Who specifies something that deliberate unless they're trying to test something? And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. What if the person inside knew they were being watched? What if they were waiting for the cops to shift position, even for just a moment? What if I wasn't the mistake? I was the variable. Send a delivery guy to the back door. See if anyone reacts. See if the house is still under surveillance. If the police act, the person inside knows they're not safe. If they don't, maybe that means the coast is clear. It was a test, and I was the control group. That curtain twitch wasn't hesitation. It was curiosity. They wanted to know how close they could let me get. And now I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if the cars had pulled in just 30 seconds later. If the person inside had decided to open the door. If they had thought, no one's watching. Would I have been dragged inside? Would anyone have known where I went? There was no camera on my car. No body cam. No backup. Russell wouldn't have checked on me for another hour, maybe more. By then, it would have been too late. And even if the police had stormed the place afterward, what then? Would I be another name on a list of unsolved cases? Would the news mention the pizza? I stood in the lot, holding that bag like it was evidence, trying to stop my thoughts from spiraling. I thought about calling the cops back, about asking for answers, but I already knew how that would go. They'd say, "Thank you for your cooperation." They'd say, "We can't disclose details during an active investigation." They'd say, "You're safe now." But safe didn't feel like the right word. I wasn't hurt, but I wasn't untouched either. The receipt was still in my pocket. That's how it all came back. I didn't think about the house anymore. Didn't think about the name. Didn't think about the curtain, or the lights that never turned on, or the man who told me to leave without asking my name. I had convinced myself I'd moved on. But 3 nights ago, I found the receipt. Not on purpose. I was digging through an old wallet, one of those small, useless things you stop using but never throw away. There it was, folded once, then again, tucked behind an expired movie pass and a single bobby pin I couldn't explain. I held it under the light. The ink had vanished. All of it. No address, no phone number, no Jerry, just a blank slip of thermal paper, stained with grease and curled at one corner. I stared at it for a long time. It was warm. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't lie awake either. I just existed, propped against the hallway wall of my apartment. Lights off, watching that receipt on the floors, or like it might move, like it might glow, or speak, or curl into the shape of a word I had forgotten. I've worked dozens of jobs since then. I've seen worse neighborhoods, stranger people, more violent places. But I've never again delivered to a house that didn't exist on Google Maps. I've never again received an order with handwritten instructions and no follow-up. I've never again felt like I was told to be somewhere for someone else's timing. And I never will, because I don't deliver anymore. Not pizza, not anything. I changed careers the next year. It wasn't because of what happened. At least, that's what I told myself at the time. But I remember how it felt, stepping into the back room of that restaurant for the last time, hearing the fryer hum, the tablet buzz, the smell of stale dough, and knowing I would never walk out holding someone else's dinner again. I burned the receipt. I didn't plan to. I just held it over the stove one morning, gas burner on, watched the edges catch, slow at first, then fast. The paper curled inward, like it wanted to hide what it had once said. No smoke, no smell, only one thing left when it was done. The grease mark, still there, in the center of the stovetop, like a shadow that couldn't be cleaned off. I scrubbed it for 10 minutes. It didn't budge. There's no moral here, no twist, no haunting, no figure in the dark watching me now. Only this. I don't eat olives anymore. I can't stand the sight of them. And if someone orders them on a pizza, I don't ask why. I just leave the room. I used to believe that houses held memories, that walls, if they could speak, would share laughter, love, and all the subtle warmth that passed through generations. But now, I know better. Some walls don't echo life. They absorb it. They suffocate it. And sometimes, they hide things far worse. I'm 40 now, and if you asked anyone who knows me, they'd probably describe my life as stable, maybe even boring. I work in insurance. I'm married. 2 sons. We live in a quiet suburb with little surprises. It's the life I wanted, and for the most part, the life I'm proud of. But what happened last summer at my late father's beach house nearly unraveled all of that. Let me rewind for a second. My dad passed away from cancer 2 years ago. He was the kind of man who kept parts of his life compartmentalized, never overly sentimental, never chatty. So when he died and left us the keys to a small beach house in Delaware, a place I'd never even seen in person, I was caught off guard. Apparently, he'd owned the place for over a decade, quietly renting it out through an agency. The man never mentioned it once in all those years. It wasn't some fancy oceanfront mansion, just a 2-bedroom, salt-worn cottage tucked 1 block off the boardwalk. But when we first pulled into the gravel driveway that summer, it was hard not to feel like it was a gift. Some posthumous peace offering. A legacy. Maybe. Something he left behind, not in words, but in action. That summer marked the beginning of what felt like a new chapter for my family. My wife, Emily, loved the porch swing and the view of the waves crashing in the distance. My two boys, Jordan and Scott, 7 and 5, spent their afternoons digging holes in the sand and chasing seagulls with plastic shovels. And me? I liked the quiet, the simplicity of it. I convinced myself that this was going to be our safe haven, a place where we could escape the grind, rebuild what burnout had chipped away from our family time. I remember the exact week it happened. Mid-July. The sun was relentless during the day, but the evenings cooled just enough to make the porch feel like heaven. On the third night, a Wednesday, the sky was bruised pink and orange as we settled into our little routine. The boys had knocked out early after a full day on the beach. Emily and I sat out back with a bottle of wine and a deck of cards, laughing about how she could never shuffle properly. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow of unease. Our oldest, Jordan, opened the sliding door behind us and stepped out onto the deck. His face was pale, lips pinched. He wasn't the dramatic type, and something in his expression made me put my glass down instantly. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked. He hesitated, looking past me into the distance before speaking. "I keep hearing scratching in the wall. It's right by my bed. I think something's inside." I traded a glance with Emily. She looked amused at first, a kid's imagination stirred up by too many scary campfire tales. But then, something about Jordan's face silenced both of us. He wasn't scared in the playful way children sometimes are. He looked confused, alert, like his body was telling him something was wrong and his mind hadn't caught up yet. I stood up. "All right, let's go check it out." As I followed him back inside, I brushed off the tension. I figured maybe there was a squirrel in the crawl space or an old pipe rattling. Typical old house stuff. But as we crept into his bedroom, I noticed how cold the air felt, even though the AC hadn't reached this side of the house yet. He pointed toward the far wall near the floor, where his bed was pushed up just slightly against the molding. I leaned down, ear angled close. At first, there was nothing, but then something moved. A soft drag, not a creak, not a thump. A deliberate, low scratching, like fingernails across wood. I froze. The room felt heavier, like it had dropped 5 degrees in an instant. Jordan looked at me, wide-eyed. "There it is again," he whispered. I nodded slowly, trying not to let on how my skin was crawling. I pressed my hand flat against the wall, expecting vibration, or maybe warmth. What I felt instead was a strange, rhythmic sensation, soft pressure, rising and falling. Like breath. That's when every rational explanation fell away. I jerked back, stumbling slightly. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the house settling. It was breathing. Deep, deliberate human breathing, slow and steady, as if someone was waiting, listening. I swore under my breath, loud enough for Jordan to hear. He grabbed my arm. Is there someone in the wall? Dad? I wanted to say no. I wanted to laugh it off and tell him he was imagining things. But I couldn't lie. Not to him. Not when I didn't even believe it myself. My instincts screamed to get out, to get everyone upstairs. But I didn't want to cause a panic either. So I did the only thing I could in that moment. Go upstairs, quietly. Stay with your mom. Don't say anything yet. His small feet padded quickly down the hall, and I followed just a second behind, my ears straining to hear if the noise moved. But the house was silent now, eerily so. When I reached the stairs, I turned back once, just a glance down the darkened hallway. That's when I saw something move in the shadows. It wasn't clear, just a flash, like a leg stepping back, or a shoulder brushing past the open door to the hallway closet. I couldn't be sure, but my heart nearly stopped. That night, something inside that house shifted. What began as a warm family getaway, a chance to reconnect, was now twisting into something darker. I didn't realize it yet, but this wasn't going to be an isolated moment of fear. It was the beginning of a descent into something none of us were prepared for. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt observed. I don't remember closing the bedroom door behind me. Maybe I never did. But I do remember the way the floorboards under my feet seemed to press upward with each step I took, like the house was breathing with me, or against me. Jordan was back upstairs with Emily, just like I'd told him. I stood alone in his room, staring at the wall he'd pointed out. The air inside the house felt heavier than it had just moments earlier, as if some invisible weight had settled across everything. The floors, the furniture, the corners of the ceiling. Don't overthink this, I told myself. It's an old house. It creaks. Maybe there's a busted air vent or something in the crawl space. Or rats. Please let it be rats. But no rational thought could compete with the raw, instinctive unease sitting like a stone in my stomach. I walked closer to the wall, crouched down, and pressed my palm against it again. Cold. Unnaturally cold. Not like AC chill. This was something else. A still, dead cold that felt completely at odds with the sticky summer heat outside. Then it happened again. The sound, the breathing, low, slow, rhythmic, deep inhalations, followed by long, dragged-out exhalations, the kind that come from someone asleep or meditating. Only this wasn't peaceful. It felt wrong, predatory. Someone was behind that wall. I yanked my hand back like I'd been shocked. My heart pounded in my ears now, and I found myself backing up unconsciously. For a few seconds, I just stood there, frozen, eyes locked onto the unmoving drywall, like I expected it to pulse or shift. And then it screamed. Not a muffled sound, not a whisper, a full, guttural, human scream. It blasted through the silence like a knife through canvas, primal, furious, inhumanly loud. I stumbled back, crashing into the dresser behind me. My knees went weak. For a moment, I forgot where I was. It came from inside the wall. I bolted. Adrenaline took over, and I was halfway down the hallway before I even realized I was running. The idea of logic, of calmly assessing what just happened, gone. I had to get my boys. I had to get Emily. I turned sharply into Scott's room, our youngest, and found him still sound asleep, curled into a crescent moon under his Paw Patrol blanket. I didn't hesitate. I scooped him into my arms without waking him, clutched his warm, sleeping form against my chest, and ran. I could hear something behind me. Footsteps. Not loud, but unmistakable, bare feet on wood. The kind of shuffle that sounds like skin slapping gently against the ground. Slow, measured, tracking me. I reached the stairs and screamed Emily's name. My voice cracked, panicked, and that's when I heard it again. Another scream, but this time it wasn't behind the wall. It was in the hallway, close, too close. I turned back, and I saw him. A figure, a man, charging down the hallway in a full sprint. His body was filthy, smeared in dirt and streaks of something dark. His eyes were wide, bulging, animalistic. His mouth open mid-roar, teeth exposed like a rabid dog. I couldn't process it fast enough. He was real. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a nightmare. There was a man inside our house, inside our walls, and now he was barreling straight toward me. I turned and ran up the stairs, gripping Scott tightly in my arms. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I had one thought: reach the deck. It was the furthest point from the hallway, the only space with a locked sliding door, and where Emily and Jordan were. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, just as the man reached the top of the stairs. He hit the glass, full force. The impact shook the frame. The door rattled in its track. I felt it reverberate through my body, as if I had been the one hit. I threw myself against it, bracing the glass with my back, as Emily screamed and rushed to shield the boys, the man outside, or thing, because nothing about his behavior felt human, began to claw at the glass, not knocking, not banging, clawing. His hands smeared something across the window, a mixture of blood, dirt, and sweat that painted long streaks down the door like grotesque brush strokes. He screamed again, a garbled mess of curses and howls, all slurred together in some twisted, incoherent rage. "I'm going to kill you," he shouted. "This is my house." I pressed harder into the glass, expecting it to shatter at any moment. Emily held Jordan behind her, her phone trembling in her hands as she dialed the police. "I already called," she cried. "They're on their way." I didn't respond. My eyes never left his. There was something in them, not madness, not desperation, possession, like something had hollowed him out and was wearing him like skin. He slammed his forehead against the glass repeatedly, again and again, each thud jarring my bones. I braced harder, but my arms were getting weak. I couldn't keep this up forever. Come on, come on. Where are they? And then, salvation. A flash of movement through the frosted glass of the front window. Dark silhouettes, sudden and swift. The police had arrived. There's something indescribable about the sound of salvation when it arrives seconds before the breaking point. It's not sirens, not voices. It's the quiet shift in air, the moment the monster knows it's not in control anymore. His eyes, wild and burning, caught something behind me, and for the first time, they changed. His rage gave way to something I hadn't expected. Panic. He stopped clawing. His hands dropped to his sides. He backed away from the glass like a cornered animal, confused by the sudden shift in energy. I stayed braced against the door, not daring to move. Behind me, I felt Emily's presence, solid and trembling. Her arms wrapped tightly around both our boys, her phone still clutched in one hand, call still active. The line silent now. Then the front door creaked open, somewhere downstairs, not kicked in, not smashed through, just opened. 2 officers, guns drawn, steps swift but calculated, entered the home. They didn't call out. They didn't announce themselves. I only knew they were there because I saw their shadows move through the hallway below. The man outside the glass, the one who'd screamed and bled and called this his home, turned to run. But he had nowhere to go. The only exit behind him was the narrow staircase he'd come from, and the officers were already on their way up. One officer reached him in seconds. With practiced movement, he lunged, wrapping both arms around the man's torso and driving him to the floor just outside the sliding door. The glass didn't break, but it shuddered violently from the impact. The second officer moved in fast, helping restrain him. I heard cuffs snap closed. Then silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes after a hurricane, when your mind is still spinning, even though the wind has stopped. Emily whispered something, but I didn't hear it. I stepped back from the door slowly, afraid that the glass might give in. My knees buckled slightly, but I stayed upright. The man on the deck, now cuffed, panting, muttering things I didn't want to understand, looked back at me over his shoulder and smiled. That smile, I'll never forget it. Not because it was menacing, but because it was satisfied. Like he'd finished something. Like he'd won. A few minutes later, another officer, this one in full uniform, escorted us downstairs. He didn't speak much, just asked us to wait in the living room while they finished clearing the house. I held Scott close while Emily tried to soothe Jordan, who hadn't spoken since the attack. When the officers returned, they asked for my version of the events. I gave them everything, every detail, from the breathing in the wall to the screaming, to the moment he ran at us. They took notes, nodding occasionally, but their faces remained tight, unreadable. Then they asked me the question I hadn't expected. Have you ever had this house inspected? I blinked. No. I mean, it was my dad's. He used to rent it out. We only started coming here recently. They exchanged a glance. The older of the two gestured toward the hallway. There's something we need to show you. I didn't want to leave my family alone again, but Emily insisted she'd be fine. The officer led me down the hall, back toward Jordan's room, back toward the wall. He stopped just outside the closet. This, he said, was hidden behind a panel in the back of the closet. You wouldn't have noticed it unless you were looking for it. I stepped forward. The closet looked normal at first. Kid-sized hangers, a few board games stacked on the floor. But when the officer pulled back a shallow panel on the rear wall, I saw it. A dark, open hole in the drywall. Behind it, space. A hollow corridor, no more than 4 feet high, leading into blackness. I crouched to get a better look. It wasn't just an opening. It was a crawl space. The house sits on a raised foundation, the officer explained. There's a secondary access point under the back porch. That's how he got in. This interior opening leads directly to that same space. It runs alongside the walls, almost the entire house. My breath caught. You're telling me he was living in here? He nodded. From what we can tell, yes. For a while. I stared into the dark, and for the first time, I noticed the smell. Musty, damp, mixed with something fouler. A metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I backed away. We'll have forensics go in, the officer said. See how long he was staying here. But from what he told us, this wasn't random. I turned sharply. What did he say? He hesitated, then answered. He told us you were intruding in his home, that he found the crawl space months ago, maybe even before your father passed. Said he liked the quiet, said it felt safe, comfortable, like it was waiting for him. The officer paused. And last night, he said he was going to reclaim what was his. I couldn't speak. We left the house the next morning. There were questions from neighbors. Of course, police tape, patrol cars, all the drama of the night before had stirred the entire street. But we didn't stay to explain. I didn't owe anyone anything. What I owed was to my wife and kids. Safety, distance, space to breathe again. Over the next week, the pieces started coming in. The man, never gave a real name, was homeless, likely mentally ill, with a record of trespassing and aggressive behavior. But nothing like this. He had been hiding in that crawl space for months, coming out only when no one was home, eating scraps from our fridge, even, apparently, using the neighbor's outdoor shower late at night. They thought it was a raccoon triggering the motion lights, and all that time, he was inside the same walls where my children slept, watching, waiting. I hired a crew the following week to seal the entire crawl space permanently. Every entrance, every panel, every void in the structure. They reinforced the floors, installed security cameras. Every square inch of that house was inspected. Still, we didn't go back that summer. Not out of fear, but out of violation. Because the horror wasn't that a man broke in. It's that he never had to. He was already here. People think that the scariest part of a horror story is the climax, the moment everything explodes. But that's not true. The real horror comes in the silence that follows. The hours, the days, the weeks, when the adrenaline fades, but the fear stays. When normalcy knocks, but you're too afraid to open the door. We didn't go back to the beach house that summer. Not for the rest of the season. Not because we were scared of what might happen. The locks were changed. The crawl space sealed. The man arrested. By every logical measure, we were safe. But we were also broken. I don't think we said it out loud, but we all felt it. Like the house had betrayed us. Not because it let something in, but because it let something hide. It had secrets, hollow walls, spaces we didn't understand. And that kind of betrayal, it doesn't just make you afraid. It makes you question everything. Emily was the first to suggest a break. We'd barely been back home for 48 hours, still living out of suitcases. When she looked at me over breakfast and said, "Let's not go back for a while, just until the boys forget about it." I nodded before she even finished the sentence. We didn't talk much about that night, not in detail, It hung in the air between us like smoke, always present, always stinging, but never quite acknowledged. Even the boys sensed it, especially Jordan. He stopped sleeping through the night. Every creak of the house sent him to our bedroom. He'd climb under the covers without a word, wide-eyed and silent, and I'd feel his heartbeat pounding through his ribs like a trapped animal. Scott was too young to understand. He remembered the man at the door, the shouting, the way I held him so tightly he almost couldn't breathe, but the memory hadn't cemented yet. Still, even he flinched at small things. The doorbell, the sound of feet on the porch, the shadows of leaves moving across the window. Emily pretended to be okay, but I saw the way she started locking the bathroom door, even when she was brushing her teeth. The way she jumped when the ice machine clattered at night. The way she kept checking the attic hatch, even though we'd never once used it. And me? I couldn't stop hearing the breathing. It haunted the quiet moments. I'd be folding laundry, and suddenly I'd freeze, convinced I heard it again, slow and deliberate, just beyond the drywall. I'd press my ear to the wall sometimes, just to be sure, just to prove to myself it was gone. But the silence never helped, because what I feared most wasn't the sound. It was the memory of it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the detective assigned to our case. He was calm, professional, but I could hear the tension behind his words. There was something he wanted to say, and something he was afraid of saying too soon. We finished the forensic sweep of the crawl space, he told me. I sat down. My chest tightened. Okay, and? There were signs of extended habitation. A mattress, cans, food wrappers, clothing. But that's not the part I wanted to discuss. I waited. There were drawings. Drawings? He cleared his throat. Scratched into the walls. Dozens of them, maybe more. All in charcoal. Some in what we suspect is blood. Mostly symbols, shapes. A few were names. I didn't speak. One of the names was Jordan. That moment shattered me. There was nothing left to hold up the illusion. The illusion that maybe this man had simply been disturbed. That maybe it was random. That maybe he hadn't meant to target us. But he had. He'd been watching. He'd known our names. The detective didn't say much after that. He told me the house was secure, that the man was undergoing a psychiatric evaluation, that I could call if I had more questions. But what question could I possibly ask? What answer would make me feel safe again? I stayed up that night. I went down the rabbit hole, the kind we all tell ourselves we won't go down. I searched for similar cases, crawl space intrusions, hidden tenants, stalkers living inside walls. It wasn't a long list, but it wasn't empty either. Apparently, people hiding in houses isn't as rare as you'd think. The Japanese even have a word for it. hikikomori. Though it often refers to reclusive behavior, it overlaps with the horror stories of people living silently in attics, storage rooms, walls, unseen, unnoticed, until it's too late. That's when I realized we hadn't survived something rare. We had survived something possible, and that made it worse. Because if it could happen once, it could happen again. A month later, I hired a trauma counselor for Jordan. Emily and I went to couples therapy, too. Not because we were fighting, but because we were scared of growing distant in our silence. It helped, little by little. We started reclaiming space, room by room. We made a game out of checking closets together. We let the boys help us seal up crawl spaces at home, with foam, with plaster, with laughter. It became a ritual. Show the house who's in charge. Still, I kept waiting for the day I'd stop jumping at sounds. It hasn't come yet. We went back to the beach house this summer, not for long, just a weekend. I was the first to walk inside. The air smelled different, cleaner, newer, but the layout was the same. The floors creaked in the same places. The light filtered through the same dusty blinds. Jordan held my hand the whole time. Scott asked if the monster man was gone. Emily unpacked in silence, eyes scanning every corner. We didn't sleep well that first night, but we slept. That counts for something. I stood on the back deck alone at sunrise, watching the tide pull back, listening to the quiet. And for the first time, I realized something. It wasn't the man in the walls that haunted me the most. It was how close I had come to losing the things I love. Not because of violence, but because of silence. Because the real horror isn't always what breaks through the wall. Sometimes it's what you never noticed was already there. We spend our lives chasing comfort, a safe neighborhood, a sturdy front door, a place where our children can sleep through the night. But nobody tells you the truth. That horror doesn't always knock. Sometimes it moves in quietly and waits for you to come home. It's been a year since the night that changed us. We're okay. On paper, the boys are laughing again. Emily sleeps through most nights. The house has been renovated, secured, and inspected more times than I can count. And me? I've memorized every inch of drywall, every baseboard, every vent. I know the difference now between safety and the illusion of it. But the question that still keeps me up some nights isn't, why did this happen? It's, what if I hadn't heard the breathing? What if Jordan hadn't spoken up? What if I had told him to ignore it? That old houses make sounds? What if I had gone back to my wine and cards? Let him fall asleep again? What if that night I hadn't been paying attention? Because the truth is, we were minutes away. Minutes from never knowing the man was there until it was too late. Minutes from waking up to something unthinkable. Minutes from losing everything without ever having the chance to fight back. And that realization, that timing saved us more than preparation, is what leaves a mark deeper than fear. It leaves paranoia. I've talked to people since then, friends, co-workers, strangers online who found the story on forums. Everyone reacts the same way. Oh my God, that's terrifying. And then, that would never happen to me. But they're wrong, because it didn't happen to us because we were careless. It happened because we trusted the walls, because we thought silence meant safety, because nobody teaches you to check inside your house when you come home. Nobody tells you to tap your walls, to pull back closet panels, to shine a flashlight under the porch before you unload your luggage. Nobody teaches you that home isn't a structure. It's a boundary you have to defend. And sometimes you don't realize it's been breached until the intruder steps out of the shadows. There was one final thing the detective told me, something I haven't shared with anyone yet. During the cleanup, when they were cataloging what they found in the crawl space, one of the techs came across something taped to the underside of a wooden support beam. A single sheet of paper, folded neatly. It wasn't torn from a book or printed. It was written by hand, jagged, rushed, barely legible. 5 words. This house let me in. That sentence has stayed with me more than the screams, more than the breathing, more than the broken glass and blood on the door, because it felt true, like the house itself had opened the door, like it was complicit. And that may sound insane. I know it does. But when you live through something like this, you stop thinking in absolutes. You stop assuming things are what they seem. You stop trusting the silence. We still visit the house, not often, but enough. I refuse to let fear take it from us entirely. But every time we go, I perform a ritual before anyone else walks in. I walk through every room alone. I knock on walls. I shine lights under beds. I open every drawer, closet, cabinet. I stand still in every hallway and listen, not because I expect someone to answer, but because I need to remind the house I'm here, that I see it, that it sees me, and that I won't forget. To anyone listening to this, maybe shaking your head and thinking, that's messed up, but not my problem. Let me leave you with this. Horror doesn't always announce itself with blood or violence. Sometimes it whispers from the shadows. Sometimes it waits in a crawl space. Sometimes it just watches. And if you think your walls couldn't hold secrets, maybe they haven't needed to yet. But that doesn't mean they can't, or that they won't. So tonight, before you go to bed, do me a favor. Take a minute, walk down your hallway, open a closet you haven't opened in a while, check behind something. Press your hand to the wall, close your eyes, and listen. Really, listen. If you hear nothing, that's good. But if you hear something you can't explain, if the air feels colder than it should, if your instincts tighten just a little, don't ignore it, because the next horror story might be yours. I should have never blinked, not under that sky, not under that silence, not while I was lying beside my best friend in the middle of nowhere, thinking nothing could touch us. But in that single breath of stillness, something shifted, and when I opened my eyes, she was gone. I never liked cities. Too many lights, too many people, too much noise pretending to be important. Where I grew up, everything had space to breathe. You could ride your bike in any direction and go 10, 20 miles without crossing another soul. There was comfort in that. There was freedom in the silence. In the way the fields stretched so wide, they seemed to promise you safety. Safety that, back then, I never thought could be broken. Summer was always my favorite season. It still is. Though now, that love is tangled with something else. Something heavy. Back then, I thought summer was about the sun, the bikes, the empty roads, the breeze threading through your shirt like a quiet secret. But what I loved most was the night. The stillness, the sense that the whole world was asleep, and I alone was awake to see it for what it really was. At 16, I was quiet, a thinker, a little dreamy, a little cautious. But I had Taylor. She was the kind of friend who moved through life with elbows out, loud, wild, always pulling me into trouble I pretended I didn't enjoy. She loved pushing limits, never dangerously, but always with a smile like she knew she'd get away with it. Taylor had this way of making boredom seem like an offense against life. That July night wasn't supposed to be any different from the dozens before it. A last-minute plan, 2 bikes, a bottle of wine stolen from her parents' kitchen, and stars, always stars. We didn't need a destination, only direction. That was Taylor's rule. If you plan it, it loses the magic. So we didn't. We just kept riding, past the last gas station, past the last blinking traffic light, past the last flicker of porch light from a house I'd never seen during the day. With every mile, the world grew quieter, darker. The pavement narrowed until it was more gravel than road. The air turned cooler, like the wind had forgotten it was summer. Then she stopped. No words, no landmarks, just skidded to a halt and grinned at me. "We're here," she said. I looked around, confused. There was nothing. And that was the point. A wide open field stretched out on either side, the kind that didn't seem to belong to anyone. No fences, no barns, just thick grass that glowed faintly under the moonlight. A ghost field. It felt like we had pedaled out of the world and into a photograph no one else would ever see. We dragged the blanket out of her backpack and laid it across a flat patch of earth. She uncorked the wine with a tiny keychain opener, handed me the bottle, and flopped down beside me with a sigh. We passed the bottle back and forth, pointing up at stars and pretending we knew their names. I think we got 2 right, maybe 3. There's a kind of laughter you only have when you're 16 and too young to know that nothing lasts. The kind that bubbles out of your ribs, that makes the air feel thick with something sacred. We talked about school, about the people we hated, about the things we'd do if we could disappear. We always joked about that, disappearing, running away, living in an old cabin with no phones, no parents, no rules, just the stars, the fields, and each other. She used to say, out here, we could vanish, and no one would ever know. That night, those words felt too close. There was a moment. I don't know how to describe it. A break in the rhythm of everything. Taylor had gone quiet. We were lying side by side, staring up. And then she looked over at me. Not a casual glance. It was long, intentional. Her eyes locked on mine like she was about to ask me something she'd been holding in for years. And in that second, I felt something shift between us. Not romantically, not clearly, but like the air between us turned into glass, and neither of us dared breathe. Then she smiled, said something stupid about the wine being terrible. We laughed, and just as I leaned back again, a streak of light tore across the sky. A shooting star. We gasped in unison. That dumb, involuntary noise you always make when something rare and beautiful happens above your head. She nudged me and whispered, "Make a wish." I didn't. I couldn't think of anything worth wishing for. I just stared at the trail, fading into blackness. We were quiet after that, peaceful, buzzed, maybe even a little sleepy. I remember laying my head back and closing my eyes, not to sleep, just to feel the breeze against my skin, just for a second. I swear on everything, I didn't close them for more than 5 seconds. But when I opened them, the sky felt different. The air tasted wrong. It was colder, still, and Taylor was gone. Her laughter, her breath beside me, the rustling of the blanket, all of it had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. At first, I called her name like it was a question. Then I screamed it like a warning. But the night didn't echo back. The field had swallowed her whole. And in that moment, I realized something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. Taylor? My voice was small, hesitant, not afraid yet. just unsure. I sat upright on the blanket. Her shoes weren't there. Her wine bottle, the bike, all gone. Only mine remained, tilted on its kickstand like a sad witness. I turned in a full circle, searching for her silhouette against the dark field. Nothing. Not a shape, not a flicker of movement. Just stillness. "Taylor!" I called louder, standing now, brushing grass from my legs. My heart beat faster, though I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the air had changed, how the breeze no longer felt like summer, how the sky looked heavier. There was no noise at all, not even the usual hum of insects or distant wind, just a dead, eerie hush. A part of me still believed she was playing a joke. Maybe she'd ducked behind a hill or run to pee behind a bush like she'd done before. But I couldn't shake the feeling creeping under my skin. This wasn't one of her games. This was different. Off. And no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find her laugh in the dark. I stepped away from the blanket and started walking. First, slowly, cautiously, then faster. The grass was high and dry, brushing against my knees. I shouted again, louder, sharper. "Taylor, this isn't funny." Still nothing. Not even a rustle. That's when I reached for my phone. It was in my jacket pocket, right where I left it. I hit the power button, and the screen lit up like a flare in the dark. My eyes squinted against it, and that's when I saw the time. 3 a.m. Exactly. I froze. My stomach turned cold. That didn't make sense. We hadn't even seen midnight yet. Last I checked, it was maybe 11:15. No way 2 hours had passed without me noticing. No way we'd fallen asleep. I hadn't even felt drowsy. I blinked again. Still 3 a.m. I checked my battery, full. Checked the lock screen again. Still 3 a.m. Then I did something I now wish I hadn't. I opened the camera app, turned on the flashlight, and spun the light across the field. Nothing. No footprints. No flattened grass where she could have walked. Just my blanket behind me, and the gentle shimmer of night dew on grass all around. As if no one had ever been here. As if I had never been here. My hands started shaking. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay. Okay." I opened my contacts, tapped her name, called, ringing. Once, twice, voicemail. I called again, and again. Each time, nothing. I sent her a text. "Where are you?" Another. "Please respond." I knew it was pointless, even as I did it, but I couldn't stop. I tried one last time, and I swear, just for a second, I thought I heard her ringtone in the distance. Not loud, not clear, just a faint series of notes, warped and distant, like someone had shoved her phone into a tunnel and played it through a tin can. I sprinted toward the sound, flashlight shaking in my grip. But it didn't get louder. If anything, it seemed to move, slipping further away with every step I took. And then it stopped, cut off like a switch flipped, and I was alone again, more alone than I'd ever been. I collapsed onto the ground. The panic hit me like a wave, cold and sharp. My chest heaved. My lungs couldn't pull in enough air. I remember looking up at the stars, hoping they'd give me something, guidance, courage, anything. But they looked wrong, like someone had pulled a thin film across the sky, dulling everything. Even the constellations looked unfamiliar, tilted, like the night had twisted itself around me. Was I dreaming? Was this a nightmare I hadn't woken from? Was I already gone? I tried one more thing. I opened Google Maps, turned on location. A blue dot blinked in the center of an endless green expanse. No roads, no names, no landmarks, just unknown area stretching across the screen. I zoomed out, still no roads, still nothing. Zoomed out more. My heart froze. The town was gone, completely gone. No matter how far I scrolled, the map refused to render anything recognizable. Just static blocks of dark green and gray. No highways. No, you are here. Just lost. I stood up too fast and nearly fell over. Okay, I muttered, louder than before. Screw this. I'm leaving. I shoved the phone into my back pocket and grabbed my bike, hands trembling. I mounted and began to pedal hard. No more looking around, no more calling. I just wanted the road. Lights, signs, anything that would tell me this wasn't some kind of reality fracture. The tires bounced over rocks and ruts as I followed the same way we came. Or at least, I thought I was. But nothing looked familiar anymore. The trail curved where I didn't remember it curving. Trees I hadn't seen before suddenly flanked the road. A wire fence loomed ahead where there hadn't been one. Was I lost? Or had the road changed? My thighs burned. My lungs hurt. I pedaled harder. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, I saw something I recognized. My driveway. I skidded to a stop and dropped the bike onto the lawn. I didn't even take off my shoes. I ran straight inside, locked the door, bolted upstairs, and fell onto my bed and cried. Not because I was weak, but because the world no longer felt real. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Not with my heart still pounding like it might burst. Not with the image of that vanishing field burned into my brain. And not with the silence in my phone. no matter how many times I checked it. No new messages, no calls from Taylor. Just nothing, like she'd never been there at all. Morning crept in without any warmth, just a pale gray light slipping through my curtains. I woke up feeling as though I hadn't slept at all. My body was heavy, my head foggy, and my heart was still pounding with leftover fear from the night before. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell if the field, the stars, or Taylor's disappearance had been a dream. It all felt distant, like it had been burned into my mind and then blurred around the edges. The first thing I did was grab my phone. No new calls, no messages. My fingers were trembling as I scrolled through the call log, hoping to see her name. Nothing. The silence felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Then, just as I set my phone down, it buzzed. A message popped up on the screen. Taylor, where the hell did you go last night? I just stared at the screen. My mind was blank for a moment, trying to make sense of her words. Me? Disappear? I quickly typed back. Me. Wait. What? You vanished. I looked everywhere for you. 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then her reply hit me like a slap. Taylor, don't joke about this. I waited for you for over an hour. I called you 10 times. You just vanished. I froze. Slowly. I opened the call history again. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. My stomach turned cold. I called her. She picked up immediately. Her voice was tight, shaky with anger and confusion. Tell me what happened, she demanded. I was freaking out. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something that made no sense, even to me? I swallowed hard and finally asked, what time did you realize I was gone? 3 o'clock. On the dot. I looked at my phone. Her voice faltered for the first time. Where were you? I thought it was you who disappeared, I said. I opened my eyes, and you were just gone. Your bike too. I even called your phone, but nothing went through. There was a pause on the line. For a moment, the silence between us felt heavy, almost alive. I called you too, she whispered, over and over. But none of those calls are showing up now. It's like last night didn't exist. We both stayed quiet, listening to each other breathe. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I muttered, what time did you get home? Close to 4, she said. The ride felt endless. Nothing looked right. Even the sky. She trailed off. I didn't need her to finish. I knew exactly what she meant. That afternoon, we met at the diner. It was the first time in years that we didn't greet each other with a smile or a joke. We sat across from each other in the same booth we always used. But it felt like something invisible sat between us. Her hands were pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. We laid our phones on the table and compared them. Same call logs. No record of any calls or texts between us after 11 p.m. It was like the hours between midnight and dawn had been erased. I know this sounds insane, I said quietly, but I don't think we were in the same place last night. Or maybe we weren't in this world anymore. Taylor stared at me. For once, she didn't roll her eyes or call me dramatic. She just nodded slightly, like she'd already thought the same thing. There was one more thing I hadn't told her yet. That morning, when I'd washed my hands, I noticed strange flakes under my fingernails. They weren't dirt or grass. They looked like dried, crushed leaves, but darker, almost black-green. I was sure I hadn't touched anything like that. When I mentioned it to Taylor, she stiffened. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she had taken earlier. It was her hand, covered in the same strange residue. Neither of us could explain it. Neither of us wanted to. After that day, we stopped talking about it. It wasn't that we forgot. It was that the memory was too sharp, like glass. We couldn't touch it without cutting ourselves. We just tried to move on, pretending everything was fine, even though a part of me knew it wasn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the field again, and I remembered the moment we both disappeared. Life didn't go back to normal after that. We tried. We really did. But it was like trying to glue a shattered window back together and pretend the cracks weren't there. The truth was, something had broken that night. In time, in space, in us. Taylor and I stopped biking past the edge of town. We stopped stargazing. Even though it had once been our favorite thing, we never said why. We didn't have to. The memory of what happened hung between us like a fog, silent, heavy, unspoken. At school, we still saw each other. We'd wave, exchange small talk, sit together at lunch, but the laughter felt thinner, forced, like we were both pretending that we hadn't vanished for a night we couldn't explain. Some nights, I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the world around me. And every time the clock hit 3 a.m., I would feel it, that same pressure in the air, like something was waiting, watching, measuring me. I told myself it was just anxiety, that I was imagining it. But the feeling never left. It started subtly, a flicker in the hallway light when I walked past, the TV turning itself on in the middle of the night, just static on the screen. My phone freezing for a few seconds at exactly 3 a.m. Every night, never earlier, never later. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, that I was looking for signs where there were none. But then Taylor messaged me one morning. "Do you ever hear that hum?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Yes." I didn't have to ask when. I already knew. A few days later, we met up again. We hadn't planned to, but I think we both needed to see each other, to make sure we were still real. We met at the old bus stop by the woods, the one we used to walk to after school, back when everything was simple. Taylor looked tired, really tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. She didn't smile when she saw me. She just handed me a notebook. "Page 37, she said softly. I opened it. There, in her careful handwriting, was a description of a dream. Except it wasn't just any dream. It was my dream. Paralysis, the low-frequency humming, the shadowy figure that leaned close without moving, and the words that weren't spoken aloud, but echoed in my mind like thunder. "Not finished." I looked up at her. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. "You dreamed it too?" I asked. She nodded. "More than once?" I told her about my own experiences. The lights, the feeling of being watched, the static on the TV. I even told her about the photo, how I'd tried to take a picture of the night sky, and the image that appeared instead, a single person lying on our blanket, alone in the field. Not me, not her, but someone or something. Taylor didn't act surprised. She just said, "I don't think we came back alone." That was the first time either of us said it aloud. There was something about that night that had followed us home. It didn't want to be seen. It didn't make loud noises or leave claw marks on the wall. But it was there, just beneath the surface, watching, waiting, reminding. Neither of us could explain why we were chosen, why we'd both vanished, why 3:00 a.m. kept repeating like a broken record. But the more we talked, the more we realized our lives hadn't just changed. They had been rewritten. Taylor said she started keeping track of every weird moment. She had pages filled with times, dates, and symptoms, headaches, flickering lights, missing time, dreams that didn't feel like dreams. I did the same. Over time, we started noticing patterns. The activity always peaked during the new moon. The dreams always came in pairs. We'd both have them the same night. And worst of all, we were starting to forget. Not everything, not the big things, but the details, like what we talked about during the bike ride, or what song had been playing in her earbuds, or whether the wine had tasted bitter or sweet. Little things, fading like chalk on a rainy sidewalk. One night, I sat in my room, flipping through my own journal. It was late, almost 3:00 a.m. I didn't want to look at the clock. But of course, I did. 2:59. I waited, heart pounding, and then the moment came. Everything went still. No wind, no hum from the heater, no sound from outside. And then, slowly, my lights dimmed. Not off, just lower. As if the room itself were being pulled into some deeper place, somewhere quieter, somewhere older. I closed my eyes, and there it was again. That voice, not a voice, pressing into the center of my thoughts. Not finished. The next morning, I woke up on the floor. My bed was untouched. My phone was face down, still recording. I didn't remember hitting record. The audio was mostly silence. But at the 2:59 mark, there was a shift, like wind through wires. A low vibration, then a whisper, barely audible. But it was there. "You're remembering too much." I sent the file to Taylor. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her message was only one sentence. "We have to stop before it notices again." That night, I closed my curtains. I shut off my phone. I lay in bed and tried not to think, but I knew it was too late. Because whatever found us that night in the field, it was still watching, and it never left. The days that followed felt like living inside a whisper. Everything looked the same. School hallways, cafeteria lines, cloudy skies. But I moved through them as if underwater. Taylor and I still saw each other, but something was changing again. Not like before. This was quieter, slower. Like a string was being cut, strand by strand, and neither of us could stop it. We had shared something unexplainable, something terrifying, but instead of pulling us closer, it was wearing us down. Maybe we were both too afraid to face it. Maybe facing it would make it real all over again. But pretending we were okay didn't mean we were. That much became obvious the day I found the notebook in my locker. It wasn't mine. At first, I thought someone had dropped it by mistake. Just a plain black spiral notebook. The cover scratched and soft around the edges, but when I flipped it open, my breath caught in my throat. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't Taylor's. But the words, they were our story, word for word. A description of the night we vanished, the bike ride, the field, the shooting star, the disappearance, even the messages we'd sent the morning after. Only the dates were wrong. The notebook said it happened 10 years ago. I sat in the bathroom stall and read every page, hands shaking. The author never used names, just Girl A and Girl B. But it was us. Every detail was right, until it wasn't. The entries continued past the point I remembered. They described a visit to someone called the Echo. a reclusive man who had experienced the same thing back in 1992. According to the notes, he lived alone in an old greenhouse on the edge of a forgotten service road just outside town. I didn't know whether to believe it, but when I showed Taylor that afternoon, she didn't hesitate. "We have to go." The road wasn't on Google Maps. We had to print out a copy of an old zoning map Taylor found online. It took us over an hour to find the path. A cracked trail hidden behind a rusted gate that looked like it hadn't opened in years. The woods on either side were thick, branches clawing at our arms as we walked. There was no breeze, no bird song, just that same suffocating stillness. And then we saw it. The greenhouse. It was larger than I'd expected, made of faded glass and twisted metal beams. Vines coiled around its frame, like something trying to keep it buried. The inside glowed faintly green, with light seeping through the moss-covered glass. We hesitated at the door. Taylor knocked. No one answered, so she opened it. The air inside smelled like old earth and rust. Plants we couldn't name grew in narrow rows along the walls. And in the center, seated on a wooden stool beneath a tangle of dead vines, was a man. Thin, pale, wearing an oversized coat covered in soil. He didn't look up when we entered. "You're early," he said quietly. His voice cracked like something unused to speaking. I felt Taylor freeze beside me. You know who we are?" He nodded. "You're not the first." We didn't sit, just stood in the doorway, waiting. He raised his eyes. They were pale, almost translucent. "Tell me the date." We told him. He nodded again, like it matched something he already knew. Then he reached under his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a stack of Polaroids. He handed them to me. I flipped through them slowly. My hands trembled. Fields, forests, stars, all empty. Then, near the bottom of the stack, I found one that made my knees go weak. It was the field. Our field, the blanket, 2 bikes, and in the center, one figure standing alone. Not me, not Taylor, but someone looking directly at the camera. Their face was blurred, not out of focus, blurred, as if it had been erased from memory, or maybe from time itself. "You saw it too," the man said. We didn't answer. He continued, "It doesn't matter what you call it, a breach, a fold, a loop, whatever it is, it's not natural, and it doesn't like being noticed." Taylor finally found her voice. "Why us?" The man looked at her with something close to pity. "It doesn't choose by reason. It chooses by pattern, and sometimes by memory." "What happens next?" I asked. He looked down. "Eventually, You'll forget? I frowned. Forget what happened? He shook his head. No. Forget who it happened to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of doubt. What if he was right? What if the memory was already fraying? What if I forgot Taylor? Or worse, what if she forgot me? The idea lodged itself deep in my chest, colder than anything I'd felt that summer. I checked my phone, instinctively. 3A. This time, nothing strange happened. No whispers, no static, no flickering lights, just silence. But it wasn't comforting. It felt like waiting. The next day, Taylor didn't come to school. I texted her. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. I biked to her house. Her mom said she had the flu. I knew that was a lie, because something had shifted again. Something had stepped closer, and this time, it was only looking at me. I stopped marking the nights. I stopped checking the time. I stopped trying to track the patterns, or decode the signs, or wait for the whispers. Because after what happened with Taylor, I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit before. I was the only one still remembering. She stopped answering my messages. I called, left voicemails, even wrote a letter. No response. When I saw her again, by accident, in the frozen food aisle of the grocery store, she looked straight through me, like I was just another stranger holding a shopping basket. I said her name. She blinked, paused, and then smiled. Not the smile I knew, a small, polite one, like the kind you give a classmate you never really spoke to. Do we know each other? She asked. And that was it. I walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no jacket, and for the first time since that summer, I didn't cry. I just felt empty. Not because she forgot, but because part of me knew. That was the point. It had chosen one of us to forget, and one of us to carry it. I went back to the field. I don't know why. It wasn't logical. There was no hope to be found in tall grass and silence. But something in me needed to return, like a bird circling back to the nest it had been chased from. It looked the same, but it wasn't. The grass was shorter. The sky felt thinner. The air didn't carry that charged silence anymore. Just wind. And a strange stillness that didn't feel threatening. Just final. I sat where the blanket had once been, closed my eyes, and waited. I wasn't expecting voices or visions or time to bend again. I just wanted to know if anything would happen. But all I got was the faint sound of leaves rustling and the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me, like the air before a thunderstorm. I opened my eyes and saw something sticking out of the ground a few feet away. It was the notebook, the same one from the locker, water-stained, torn at the edges, but unmistakable. Only now, the pages were blank. Every single page. I flipped through it over and over again, desperate to find something, anything that would prove it had once held the truth. But it was gone, like it had never been written at all. And that's when I understood. This wasn't about the field. It wasn't about the figure in the photo. It wasn't about dreams or echoes or even Taylor. It was about memory, about what stays and what gets taken, and who's left behind to carry the weight of both. Some nights I still lie awake, but not to watch the clock. I don't need to. The hour finds me on its own. Not always at 3. Sometimes at 2:47. Sometimes at 4:01. But I always know when it's here, because everything in the room gets very still, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for me to forget. And I never do. I can't. Because if I let go of the story, even for a second, it will unravel. Taylor will vanish again. The field will be gone. And I'll be no different than everyone else who's ever brushed up against the edge of something they weren't supposed to see. So I keep the story alive. I tell it. Not because I want to, not even because I need to, but because I don't know what happens if I stop. And maybe that's what it wanted all along. Not to erase me, not to take me, but to make me the last page in a book no one else can read.